All systems go. Clear for liftoff. What's up, everyone? Tyler Tamboline here, aka ToeTagginTambo, back for another edition of Leveraged Lane. We've got week 6 of the NFL DFS week ahead. Got my guy Alex Blickle here with me as always to break it down. Little Devontae Adams cover shot this week on the thumbnail. So you know where we're going this week. We're going to be talking a lot about those Rams, obviously a big part of this slate, but we're going to do it like always. We're going to break down ownership. We're going to go not narrative street, but leverage lane. We're going to walk our way down that street and we're going to be able to see the ownership in a way you don't usually see it broken down, how to leverage the common build, especially in single entry. That's our focus here. And then the light at the end of the lane. And speaking of that, Alex, last week we had some pretty good ones again. The Dak with Ferguson, with Pickens, with Hall, with no Wilson, which ended up, again, Wilson did fine, but it was like that was a good setup for single entry. A lot of people got there with that. If Tolbert had done anything, it would have been an even better week for folks out there. And then you had the big Jamar Chase call, and what a game for him. Huge. These wide receiver ones, they still find their way to come through. So what's going on, man? How you doing?
Yeah, it was a really fun week last week. I thought we've kind of had this stretch of weeks where they've all been high scoring lately. Like one of the things that I preach all the time is I'm trying to win the low scoring slates, which usually means that a bunch of chalk has to bust, and we just haven't gotten those. So like, you know, one of the things that we've talked about, one of the themes we've talked about is it's not just about being right about who you play. It's also about being right about who you choose not to play.
Yeah.
And so like the Jamar Chase call, the Jake Browning call, that was awesome for me last week, except those guys didn't separate from the chalk that I didn't play. So it didn't end up helping me in a big way. Hopefully we can continue to hit on those contrarian upside calls and get one of those low scoring weeks when that really matters and will vault us to the top of the leaderboard.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I think the thing was, and obviously I know it wasn't ideal. I actually didn't love it either. And I'm your partner in crime here on this show, but it's like Browning with these two, with whatever, but I get where it came from and why it made sense. It really did do a pretty good job. Imagine if Browning played the first 3 quarters. Actually, I mean, like he showed up basically in the 4th. He did play, but get us some points on the board. It would have been even better. But to your point and credit, a great call on how it worked and how it would work. But if it hadn't have been like a 250 type point week, that type of stuff, especially again, as people got to remember, we're talking about single entry. It's so funny too, Alex. It's like no one talks about single entry. It's all MME. Then we talk about single entry, like, but your Browning Chase call, that didn't win a tournament. It's like we're explaining how it would work. And in single entry, it can come through in a big way when that stuff goes right and allows you to fit all of the other stuff on top. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it matched any other stack that you could have had, right? Like Browning ended up getting to 23. Chase was at like 32 or something. Higgins got the touchdown that saved his game. And like in the afternoon only slate where I went into the slate thinking, okay, I'm not going to need as high of a score to win that slate. I flipped it around. I had Goff with Montgomery, Jamison Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Sam Laporta with just Jamar Chase as the bring back. Obviously, they're saying like this is the high probability route of Detroit scores 1 million points. I don't need Cincinnati to do as much as I do when I have the actual Browning stack. But both paths ended up super viable. The thing that killed me from that game actually was Jamison Williams not showing up at $4,900, which I thought was kind of shocking to me. I loved that spot, and I'm very okay with being wrong about that spot. But I think we can kind of attack that same Cincinnati team this week in maybe a more informed way based on that and some of their other kind of deeper data, which I think is becoming stronger and stronger at this point in the season.
Yeah, the Jameson Williams play, the Best Buy pricing sold us, man. We got the TV for just under $500. He was $4,900 instead of $5,000. We bring him in, we bring him home, and he breaks down on us. Not a good week for him, but certainly at the price, you're never going to complain about that. We know what the boom bust capability is, and again, people have to remember that the pricing matters. It makes stuff work in your lineups to be able to fit other things. And this week, Alex, a bit different. We're going to go through it here in a second of the ownership and just do a quick run through by position, the fast stuff. But I will say, like the CMC, Puka stuff, these guys are back on the slate. More interesting to me about CMC because there's other running backs, and it's a 10-gamer like last week. A lot of those mid-range running backs. So what's your first sort of overview when it comes to ownership across the board?
Yeah, I think there are two things we really want to keep in mind this week. The first being most of the field is going to play a Ram in some way. We have over 30% ownership right now on Kyren Williams, over 30% on Puka. I think both of those guys are capable of steaming as high as like 50%, but I don't think they will both steam. I think we're going to see a preference between one of the two. If I had to say right now, I'd say it's probably Kyren just from a price prohibitive standpoint on Puka Nacua. And honestly, like I think I watched your show with Pat, and I think that you guys were kind of all over that the whole time. It's like, man, it's a lot easier to build lineups if we go Kyren than Puka. So I think he could be the one that really steams.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll see some ownership on Devontae Adams too. But like I think something as high as 60% of lineups are going to be using at least one Ram. So that's kind of the first thing we want to keep in mind. And the second thing is we do have a lot of running back chalk points. Again, I don't think pricing has totally caught up to this, but we have Rico Dowdle at like 35% in single entries. We have Devontae Williams at 30%. We have Kyren Williams at 30%. So, there are going to be a lot of very popular running backs. In fact, we have 6 guys projected over 20%. Rashad White, Josh Jacobs, Christian McCaffrey being the other guys kind of there. And one thing you'll notice there is that spans $8,400 to $5,800. So we don't have the super cheap options like we had last week, but it's still a pretty wide range. That means that the field is going to be able to build different styles of lineups where some are paying up at running back, some are paying up at receiver, some are paying up at tight end, and so we don't have quite as like of a laser focused chalk build as we've had in some other weeks, like we did way back in week 1. So leveraging the chalk build is a little bit harder this week just because there isn't necessarily a chalk build. There are several.
Yeah, I want to talk about this too because it came up on the show yesterday that you mentioned, and I think it's October. What is it? It's somewhere at the end of the month. But anyway, somebody said this, and this has been so. What people don't know, again, it's always a product of the slate too. So we'll bring this up in the early stage of like ownership, and then we're going to get to the common build. And I definitely don't think this is the common build at all. But I'll say, as the season goes on, and we're already seeing it this week, like Puka, the prices go up, which means the pricing gets tighter. They don't seem to lift the tight end pricing. And if we don't end up ever with like a running back, people never feel as good about like the super cheapy wide receivers sometimes, but even sometimes like a Jalen Coker this week, if he does play, he's not even 3K, he's 4,200. So that's an example where people, when they have the cheap running back like Dowdle last week, that's why it's such a good opportunity. No one knows he's getting 210 yards or whatever the heck it is with the touchdowns. It's like, this is kind of the setup of just the way the slate works. But tight end, double tight end happens when there's the pricing set up to make that work. The thing I'm saying is even last week, people were joking that it was National Tight End Week, and it still wasn't required. There was just so many running backs and so many ways to get there. Do you have any thoughts early on this show just around that? Because we'll get to it soon when we get to the builds anyway.
Let me start with this. Do you have a guess on what percentage of lineups last week, and let's just use the $200 single entry as an example here. What percentage of lineups do you think used double tight end last week?
5 to 7.
1%.
There you go. So it's still little.
Yeah, I think there are a couple things there. Number one, like tight ends did do quite well last week. So when we see the fact that I looked at the top 10 finishing lineups and none of them had double tight end, it doesn't mean that double tight end wouldn't have worked. It tells us more that double tight end really wasn't used. If no one's using double tight end, it's obviously impossible for a double tight end lineup to come at the top. Now it was 1%, not 0%, so it still was possible, but I think you get the point there.
Yeah.
I think it's okay. What I always look at is if you are using double tight end, you are using both of them, both tight ends, as a pivot off the guys in that range who are running backs, wide receivers. Now, in the past few years, I think this has been a major, major mistake because when you have looked at the guys in those price ranges, number one, it's been clear that the tight ends have not projected better. Like, maybe you could argue they projected in line with some of those other guys, but then from a ceiling perspective, they were way behind. And I'll give you an example here. So like in our projections over at FTN this week, let's look at Jake Ferguson. Jake Ferguson's going to be one of the more popular tight ends this week. We have him at a 12.6 point projection, pretty much the exact same. Actually, it is the exact same as Chris Olave, 12.6. It's a little bit behind Michael Pittman at 14.4. or Jalen Warren at 12.9, or Marvin Harrison at 12.7. So you're not getting a projection advantage. And then let's look over at our ceiling projections. 30.2 for Chris Olave, 31 for Marvin Harrison, 27 for Jake Ferguson. So you're sacrificing too much there. When I'm playing a tight end, I'm trying to win the position. I want my tight end to separate from the other tight ends. But if he does that, you don't want a second tight end. So you're almost like hurting your own tight end play if you get that tight end play right, if you play a second tight end, because as a one-off position, like quarterback, you're really kind of sacrificing an opportunity to separate within that position from the rest of the field if you use the second.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with any of this. Like, people take it so seriously or personal in the chat when we talk about this stuff. It's to help get better and learn at the game. And you're right. It is a different slate altogether. And this is the whole point about leveraged lane, play in your lane, stay in your lane, whatever you want to do. If that's how you see it, run it. My take is actually completely different. The validity to everything Alex just said is fact. And it's if only 1% do it. There was tons of lineups that you could have seen on paper have 2 tight ends last week. Remember, it's a product of the rest of the slate and also what they do. All I'm saying is we have like 7 to 10 running backs again this week. And last week, there was just no way it was happening. Once Dowdle gets there, that's already comparison to the price. And as you said last week, a great point. I got a lot of good feedback on this one too in the DMs and side notes that people said, I loved his point about everything's a flex. Like it's all flex when you're running it through. And that's the whole point. That kills the opportunity for your flex to be something different when you already have a $4,300. That covers off the value wide receivers. That covers off the second tight ends. It's all facts. It's all a product of the slate. If Dowdle doesn't have the big game, maybe that changes things. But again, not as many people built for it. If it's your lane, stick to it. This slate is 100% different than last week. And there's a couple different ways we're going to get to that when we talk about leveraging it and doing different things. But the comparisons that are being made of like Ridley and even yours, Olave, all that, no one's playing them anyway. Like that, it's like they're getting some ownership, but it's not like, let's see, probably Olave
is going to be pretty popular. Ridley won't be, but
let's say Olave gets to 15 to 20. It's like, that's popular for sure. I'm just saying that's not the auto decision that everybody has in their lineup where you have to just be like, well, if everyone's going Olave, no, everyone is not. For every 100 people in a room, 80 of them to 85 of them are stepping out and letting you stay in the Olave room. That's 85 to 15. And then extrapolate it up to 200,000 in some of these tournaments. We're talking more single entry, but just noting that so people see it across all angles. It doesn't mean it's right. It's just, this is the type of thoughts you have to have going into this stuff. So
the last thing I want to say on this is, he brought up like Calvin Ridley for one thing. Like, I'm in agreement. I don't want to play Calvin Ridley either. He also doesn't project as well as those other guys who has that tight end. But if you are going to go double tight end, I think that's actually like a very good point. And he mentioned Tucker Kraft down at 4,700. Okay, let's look at who's around Kraft at 4,700. Now it's Ridley or Trey Tucker or Rashid Shaheed or Jerry Jeudy. Like, Kraft actually does project better than those guys. So if you're going to go double tight end, you want it to be 2 really cheap guys. Because even if you did like Tucker Kraft and then Trey McBride in the flex, or even if it was Trey McBride at tight end and then Tucker Kraft in the flex, it's that same conversation, right? They're both in the flex for you in reality, because you could have taken either of them out to put in that receiver. So if you're going to go double tight end, you want to make sure that neither of those tight ends are competing with better projected or better ceiling wide receivers and running backs. And the only way you can do that is if you go really cheap. So like Tucker Kraft is probably the most expensive tight end that could be in a viable double tight end.
And I'll add one last point, and then we're going to do a quick run through of the position by position just to say like the points that then we'll use that to build, go into the segment 2 of talking about the common build. But just to note, projections love this, and so do optimizers, because optimizer inputs are your outputs. I've stressed this all season long. So when you run an optimizer, you actually will see a lot more 2 tight end lineups, but that's because it's auto assumption on median projections of guys like Puka, CMC. It just says, I got to get you all those guys to get the best projected points. If you see other paths of guys like CMC maybe not getting there in this matchup, or the way your lineup looks better without it, that's where you may not need that. And then that leads to different builds on top of that. So I think that's really good to talk about. I'm glad you brought up the point, and I think that's good for everybody to hear. All right.
You'll see that less, by the way, if you optimize towards the ceiling instead of the median projection. Like in our optimizer, you can choose what blend you have between the median projection and the ceiling projection. And the more ceiling you select, the less double tight end you'll see.
Yes. Yep. Great points all around. And that's why it's a good conversation. I mean, that's what this is all about, just talking about it and then how you can apply it. And like you said, to your point too, if it's going to be 1% in the $200 single entry, or we love the $100 single entry, the 100K up top. Everybody loves that. It's like, you could play in it. If you're watching this, you're probably more of a diehard DFS fan enough to be able to put $100 in, that you're probably thinking about that at least somewhat each week. This is more about that, and it may not be required, but it would be a way to get different if that's your lane. Real quick, just to help get us to this, and anything you see different in your stuff, because I know you track more Steam and things. I love the Williams call, actually, the setup there. We'll talk about more with the one Ram and all of that, but I'm seeing early right now Drake May, Baker Mayfield, Trevor Lawrence. I'm seeing Dowdle, Javonte Williams, Rashad White, Williams, who you talked about. CMC actually looks like he's going to be more popular than Jonathan Taylor. Of course, we know Puka is easily affordable. Still, I mean, it's expensive, but I shouldn't say easily affordable. Easy to get into your builds. Again, it's not about the one player. It's about the entire lineup. He's able to get in there. We'll talk a ton on that today, of course. People can still get to JSN, Egbuka with all the injuries over there, Tet, Pickens. Maybe we see Tez Johnson. Like we'll have to see what we see there. And then you talked about a tight end as much as there's more like spread out there. Everybody's 12 to 15, and we'll see how it all steams up. But like Kraft, McBride, Warren, Ferguson, maybe even Meyer, Tongs, Long, some of the cheapies there. So what are you seeing right now? If we're going to move to segment number 2, Alex, and talk about sort of how to leverage the common build, the player combinations, the game stacks. We'll get to all that stuff in a bit, and then our leverage lane at the end. What are you seeing more for the common build right now?
So I think one of the differences that I have from what you just said is at wide receiver, I think there's going to be like a big tier break in ownership drop from number 1 Puka to like the second tier, which I think is going to be like Olave, JSN, and maybe Tet McMillan, and then another drop before you get to Diggs, Pittman, maybe Pickens in that group, and then another tier drop before you get to Ibuka. So I think the story with the pricing is that both at running back and at wide receiver, it's like this $7,000 range is kind of no man's land, if you will, where there are so many good plays in the upper 5s and in the 6Ks that it's almost like people are saying, all right, if I'm going up above that tier where I have all these good options, I may as well go all the way up to McCaffrey, to Jonathan Taylor, to Puka Nacua, or I'm just going to stay down in that 6K range. And so I think JSN, we have it like 22%. I think he's kind of the only guy in the 7s, along with Josh Jacobs actually at 7.3, that is going to get a decent amount. And I actually think that both of those guys would have been a lot more popular if not for the fact that we have this like loaded 6K range at both positions where people can just choose to go a more balanced and almost like a less aggressive lineup building style.
Yeah, I think one thing too is the chat's talking a ton about this already. Like again, going to the common build, like how are you seeing the quarterback set up on your side? Because the conversation around like Baker being leveraged, there's going to be different ways to leverage Baker. But I think because of I still have Egbuka again a little bit higher, but we'll see how it plays out. But what I see also is if Tez Johnson gets steamed up any or things like that, people start to find a way to just make it all work. They saw what he did last week. It's affordable. You can still fit all the 6K running backs in. And then people feel like if they don't, again, way more people will have Rashad White. Don't get me wrong here, but I'm saying, and so I don't think Baker makes the common build, but I'm just saying in talking about that from the other side, I also don't know if Baker to Egbuka with Tez is like the starting point of completely different versus maybe putting White into those builds or doing something differently that way. And anything you're seeing on that angle of things at the quarterback position with Baker and others?
Last week, we had Fields over 30% owned in single entries. That's exactly where he came in. We don't have anything close to that this week. May is the top of our single entry ownership projections at 12.3%. We have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 guys projected over 5.0%. So to me, like the quarterback ownership almost doesn't even matter this week. The stacking partners are where you're going to separate. The stacking partners where you can either get different or you can find a lot of chalk. Like, for example, Matt Stafford. If you use the Stafford and Puka stack, like Stafford's 4.5%, but even if they smash, that doesn't necessarily mean Stafford's going to separate from the quarterback. So I almost think we want to just like completely ignore quarterback ownership this week and just focus on the ownership of your stack partners. How much correlation are you getting? Things like that, and what is the chance that your game environment as a whole really takes off? If you have a quarterback at 8% versus 12%, that doesn't really make a meaningful difference in my mind. It matters if the receiver that goes off along with your quarterback is 8% or is he 25%. That's what's really going to make the difference between whether your stack is separated or not.
So what do you see right now as the common build? If you're looking at it right now on your end, and with the conversation that we always have around like the steam and people coming up, and then we'll get to the combinations. I know people love that. Another great call with it last week, and it ended up being like last week, one of the common ones was Hall, Ferguson. And if you look at the Millie Maker, it was Fields, Hall, Ferguson, but a lot of people that did that got to Wilson, got to other stuff, and you didn't necessarily need that. There was other ways to get there, or you could do Darnold with some stuff on a different game. What are you seeing as the common build right now, or like the starting core of what people are hitting with?
It's weird. Like I almost think there isn't one in terms of the stacks. I think the common build is going to be, you're probably going to see one pay up, whether that pay up is all the way to Puka or CMC or to Jacobs or JSN. I think we'll see one, maybe max of like two of those spend ups, but then we're going to see a lot of players in the upper 5K range, low to mid 6K range. You have a group of that, by the way, at both running back and wide receivers I mentioned. So like Rashad White, Javonte Williams, Kyron Williams at the receiver position, Michael Pittman, Chris Olave. So, I think it's mostly going to be like a balanced build across with one or two payups and whatever stack fits in there. And then I also think this might be a week where we see fewer double stacks just because there are a handful of kind of pretty good one-off wide receivers. We also saw last week 79% of people used a running back in the flex, which also means that's one fewer wide receiver position that people can use in the flex, which means we see fewer double stacks because people are hesitant to use all of their wide receiver spots in from the same game. It's something that you've been talking for years about on Pat's show. Like you actually like doing that in part because it's a unique way to build. So yeah, I think maybe one takeaway from that is if we are thinking about how to leverage the common build, find a double stack. You could even find some triple stacks, like if you want to go with Herbert and all three of his receivers, because that type of thing, that going all in on one game environment might be a little bit less likely this week than what we have seen in the past.
Yeah, I think that's another good way to get different. One thing you brought up there that I really like is part of the common build. I think the common build this week, which we're about to go there in a second, of other angles and combinations, is everybody always thinks the combinations have to be a secondary stack in the same game of like everyone always assumes it's running back, wide receiver, running back, tight end, or something like that from the same game. When in reality, this week, it's like running backs are the common, like everyone's using the same running backs. And we know that gets them to certain other things. But I'm just saying, you nailed a point there. It's like people like Drake May, but they're going to like him with Diggs. And then they're not going to try and figure it out further. People like Bryce Young, but they like him with Tet. And they're not going to necessarily, we're talking single entry again. Obviously, everyone's like, they're going to play him with this guy, that guy. Of course they are. We're talking single entry, though. Like a lot of people are going to stop and say, I feel good there. Do I need a run back or not? We'll see. And then let me just fill in the Dowdles, the Rashad Whites, et cetera, and you keep it going. So I think that is what we see. Even like last week, and again, not that you needed other stuff, but you saw way more people that had like Darnold, JSN, and didn't try and figure out Kupp and Barner and all these other things where Barner ended up having 2 touchdowns. But it's like that's not what was really needed. And again, it would have been nice. It's not that you couldn't have got there with it, but nobody had it, so it wasn't needed. And like you talked about earlier with the 1% thing. And then also people are more comfortable just stopping at that. Even Igbuka, I know people are seeing, like I said, with Tez Johnson, with other people like Shepard or Otten or whatever they do. Yes, they make more sense when you're stacking them. But in like a single entry, I think you just see if people are leveraging White or they may play both together, I think it's way more of like a Baker, Igbuka. I don't need to play White anymore. I can play Dowdle. I can play Jacobs, whoever else that looks like. So what do you see as some of the combinations this week outside of it that just you're going to know are going to be more common? And again, we don't have the real numbers like we tell everybody until Monday, but we can kind of get a good idea of it via everything we've looked at so far leading up to the spot in the lane.
Yeah, it's funny because most of the time I start this conversation with like, okay, well, obviously all we have to do is go to the chalkiest game, except the chalkiest game, the Rams. People don't want to use the Ravens as a bring back. So I don't think it's going to be that game. I think Carolina and Dallas is probably the number one game we have to watch out for in this regard. So I wouldn't use Dowdle with Ferguson. I wouldn't use Dowdle with Pickens. I wouldn't use Pickens with Tet or Ferguson with Tet. Even last week, like Hall and Ferguson ended up together in a lot of the winning lineups. But think about what you could have done otherwise there. If you were using Ferguson, like he was the key, and then Hall was just in there because he did pretty well and was in so many of those Ferguson lineups. So it's the same idea, right? Like there's this selection bias. Who shows up in the winning lineup? Well, it's usually like who are the most popular guys because there are more chances for that lineup or for that combination to have the right combination of other players. Breece Hall wasn't in the winning lineup because he smashed so much. He was in the winning lineup because he was surrounded by the players you needed to have. So if you only had Ferguson, like you got what you wanted from that game. Ferguson and the Dallas offense was a little bit more conservative because they had a lead. They slowed the game down. Ferguson got there on reception volume more than anything else. So you didn't need Breece Hall on the way back. Similar idea here. You could use Dowdle on the way back from Ferguson. I don't think they're very correlated, if at all. But you don't need to do that. If you have Ferguson, you're almost saying, I hope that Dallas gets ahead. They get to play conservative style. They don't have to push the ball downfield. Man, think about how close we were to that Jets game last week. Just totally failed. Not just the garbage time stuff for Garrett Wilson and Justin Fields, but also it was one deep play for Pickens. If you take that play away from him, he also fails. And so like we were so damn close from having just the smash from Ferguson and nobody else in that game doing even remotely well. Hall might have still gotten the 100-yard bonus and gotten to 20, but we were really close to just Ferguson being the guy you needed. And I think we can do the same sort of thing this week in this Carolina-Dallas game. By all means, you can pick your favorite one-off from the game, but unless you're full stacking it with a Dak double and a bring back from Carolina or a Bryce double and maybe even like two bringbacks from the Cowboys, I think you really don't want to go with those mini stacks because there are going to be enough game stacks that those are going to pass you if you have a mini stack unless you get really lucky on the right combination like you could have done last week with Ferguson.
Yeah, one of the most interesting things the last week too is like we talk about it all the time. This is the segment where we talk about flipping the build. Javonte Williams and Mason Taylor crushed for like 1/20th of the ownership of the other side of that thing, if you really think about it. So, yeah. And again, it didn't beat it or whatever the way you want to look at it, but I'm saying it's like that's the whole point of why we look for these types of things. And I have a question for you too while we're on this segment, because I think there's a lot of, I think it's showing right now, like in like smaller field stuff too. Even you hear people talking about Javonte Williams and Dowdle. Do you think it's because people are playing them both together? And who do you think actually comes in higher owned in the single entry stuff that we're talking about here? Dowdle or
I think Dowdle's going to be the more popular one. And I think this is something that I look at every single week. The combinatorial ownership of running backs playing against each other used to be a lot lower than what you'd expect to given their individual ownerships. So people were very clearly saying, I don't want to use two running backs from the same game. We are not seeing a boost in combinatorial ownership from game stacking with two running backs, but we're also no longer seeing that, avoidance of it. So I think it's kind of neutral, which means if you like them both, you don't necessarily need to think that they're positively correlated to play them both. Like you can just think, hey, they're both really good plays. I'm going to play them both. But you're also probably not getting that correlation boost that you would get from, two receivers that may or may not be counteracted by the extra ownership. So I don't have an issue with it. It's also not something that I am purposely targeting and trying to do more of. One other combination that I think is really, really worth avoiding is Chris Olave and Steph Diggs. Both of these guys are going to be around 20% ownership. We actually, by the way, have Olave up at 23.6%. I think that could come down, especially if someone like McMillan or Diggs or Smith and Jigba ends up steaming up. But both of those guys, Olave and Diggs, are going to be around 20%. They're also both like the by far like the most attractive guy on their teams to play. So anyone who wants a piece of that game is probably going Olave and Diggs. And both of these guys, like they're not necessarily big play guys. They're going to get there with receptions and yards. So their offense is on the field. The other offense is not. I think these guys might even be inversely correlated, but they're going to be played together as if they're really positively correlated. So that is definitely a combination to avoid.
It's also goes with, I was going to just bring this up, and that's a perfect example of this. So Binking, who's been great in the chat today, said, with my builds, I'm literally able to pay up for any quarterback. Newens, who's an awesome dude over at SHIPIT Nation, he's going to be joining us on the Takedown Breakdown Monday, October 20th. He said, I would start with it at your quarterback and build out. I think actually on this slate, and that's typically what everybody does. I'm not saying I won't. That's, how I usually start. It's kind of like a common thing, just you get your stacks and then you build out. But when people are going with more of these one-offs, I think there is like in that, like a Igbuka with Baker, and that's it. Or you just gave a great one, was Diggs. The thing about Diggs and Olave is that's the May stuff is coming from that. And then it just be like, well, I'll go with the safety of Olave. He's Shaheed's risky. I know he's the big play guy, but he's almost as expensive as Olave. Olave's safer. People do that. And so realistically, a guy like Shaheed would be probably more likely to speed it up and fire these guys up back and forth. But it could be like last week, we almost saw Shaheed and Slayton. It could be more of something like that, like a Booty and Shaheed, and everyone's like, oh, I was in the right place on the wrong two guys, and you get a bunch more money. And I'll talk more on that in a second when we go to the next portion of this. But I think it's fine if you go like Binking does this week and you build out your lineup of kind of what you want to see happen, and then start to see there is so many quarterbacks that could fit that build. And then maybe you start to see additional pivots or additional ways where you're not really going crazy. You're just making a different variation of it that still makes a ton of sense. So I actually don't hate that on this slate, especially for single entry like we're talking about. So the second thing I want to note with that, if you have more on that, by all means, go ahead. But I would say the second thing I want to note is it feels like a lot of people see and understand that the common build is 3 mid-tier running backs. Like we get it, right? It's even if you count Jacobs in it, but it's the 6K guys and the $5,800 guy. It's Williams, Dowdle, White. And then, yes, people might get to JT or CMC, one or the other, as well as, but most of those people want to spend that money on Puka. So there's that. But the other, like there's so many ways to leverage within that I want to talk about quick. And one of them is just the expensive running backs, like the CMC or the JT. Like JT is in a similar spot and he just continues to crush. So the props are there, the numbers are there, everything looks good. Yet it looks still to me, Alex, like if people go to a more expensive running back, it's likely to be CMC because he's only $100 more, and they think about the injuries and et cetera, et cetera. The second part is you can cut in to these running backs pretty quick. Here's an interesting one. I loved your call earlier on Williams for the Rams. Agree with you fully. Because the Puka lineups look tricky at times, there's a chance we see even Puka's single entry ownership come down just a little bit as Williams ownership goes up. Most won't want to play them together. It's the exact same matchup. It's, people don't want the full Stafford stack, and I get it because it's who's going to push it from the Ravens side with no Lamar and with everything they've got going on. Last week, the Houston defense was the chalk against Cooper Rush. The Rams defense, because of pricing and where they sit and just people ignoring it altogether, there's already the Packers there. There's already the Colts there, and I get all that. But why wouldn't you just cut into Williams with the Rams D in the exact same spot against the same quarterback that everybody wanted to play against last week, and it worked out? So there's alternative methods and things that you can do, but with the current running back common build, as well as moving off the current running back common build. And I think that's more of a discussion too, as we move into game stacks and whatnot in a second, but I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think if I were MMEing, I would have at least one lineup, probably only be one out of 150, but it would be the Rams defense and Blake Corum instead of Kyron, with the hope that, if the Rams score multiple defensive touchdowns and they're up big late, Kyron Williams is not going to be on the field. Blake Corum will. And maybe you get, a late 60-yard touchdown run from Corum. He ends up with the 100-yard bonus because he got to play almost all the fourth quarter. So there's a path for that sort of thing. But more to your point there is if the Rams defense does really well, this Rams offense, number one, they're not on the field as much. Number two, they don't have to do a damn thing in the second half. So yeah, I think that's a really good call and potentially a way that you can leverage this game. There's also another one that's going to be my leverage lane. It's almost like not even worth keeping a secret. It's so obvious, especially with our cover guy. But yeah, I agree with all of that. And
let's wait and talk about the game stacks first, because we always talk about how to play with what we know. And again, the chat's been fired up today. It's a lot of good little comments and players people like. I think Binking's the MVP of the chat, but says, things about CMC. And then It says, so just throw salary and ownership out the window when picking RB combos. LOL. No, that's not what we're saying at all. And again, like says, maybe it's more contest dependent. Running back chalk, as you've seen every week almost this season, is definitely the best chalk. It's most likely to hit at any given time. It's pretty much outside of the Puka most obvious week ever, like 6 points ahead in projections. Like then that's, figure that out for sure. Outside of that, running back chalk does smash year over year. Like this is a sample we have now that it's typically much better, but it's not saying, that's what my point was just currently of saying, like, even if you can't move away from those 4 common options from 5,800 to 6,400 with Javonte down to Dowdle, just look, there's ways to get different with them. You can already stack different stacks. We're about to get to game stacks. I think there's a couple that stand out to me in a minute that aren't even part of my leverage lane. And then also there's defenses that can cut into them. Like the week that we keep bringing this up, but Jordan Mason was chalking. Everyone's like, oh, I'm just going to fade that loser. It's like, you could have just played his defense with them at 4% ownership and added 30 more points to the clearly great running back play. So that's what I always look at, Alex. And it's not who you play. It's how you play them. It's the full lineup. It's not just the setup of this, one option or one combo or one player, but you do need to be thinking about that stuff as you're building out. What else do you got there? And then if not, let's get into some of these game stacks that we can talk about. And if you want to talk more about the Rams, we can do that too. I know you've got something on that at the end though.
Yeah, I've got something actually pretty interesting here in the data. This is another thing that I've tracked, looking at running back chalk versus wide receiver chalk and how they perform. I agree completely. When you were looking at like 20% guys and one's a running back, one's a receiver, the 20% running back is more likely to succeed. However, there's a weird phenomenon where when you get to like what I call mega chalk wide receivers, and it's a little bit arbitrary what the cutoff there is. Sometimes I use 30%, but it's also about like how much they're separating from the next most popular receiver, so on and so forth. Mega chalk wide receivers are actually more likely to succeed than mega chalk running backs. We see them a lot less often. Right. So Puka is almost like a perfect example of this from a few weeks ago when he got the 39. It's like, when a wide receiver is that popular, there's a reason for it. It's a lot harder for a wide receiver to get that popular because people already know that, typically speaking, running back chalk is more likely to succeed. Now, the other caveat to this is the NFL is changing. It's always changing. And this year, we're seeing more and more teams become more run heavy. Something like 25 of the 32 teams have a pass rate under expectation, depending on your own definition of what the expectation is, in comparison to what we've seen in the last 5 years or so, where teams were passing a lot more aggressively. This is the reaction to so many more teams using too high defenses and inviting the run. And now teams are saying, okay, we're not going to be able to throw the ball explosively. We actually have to take what they give us on the ground. We have to get that second safety to come down into the box, and then we can start throwing the ball downfield again. So because of that, I also think running back chalk is better this year, and it's probably going to continue to be better this year than it was 2-3 years ago, because so many more things are flowing through those running backs, through the running game, setting up play action, and even like a lot of passing is now, if they're going to sit in too high, we're going to dump it down to the running back so they get an extra 2-3 free points a week. So I think this is a really kind of cool conversation, and I happen to have a lot of really good data on this. So running back chalk is better, but when you get that like really rare mega chalk wide receiver, understand that there's a reason he's that popular, and he's extremely likely to be successful. And
that's the key. And that's no surprise to anybody who watches this show. I mean, we literally had that in full the week of the Puka, like what was he, 70? I forget what his receiving yards prop was that week. It was insanely low. Like what does your book have right now if you pull it up for the Puka receiving yard prop? Do you know?
Yeah, I can get it. I think I saw like 96.5.
I'm trying to see. My book actually took him down for some reason. It has Devontae up there, and then it doesn't have him. Yeah, Devontae 65.
He's 95.5 at DraftKings, FanDuel, Caesars. He's 96.5 at Bet Rivers, 97.5 at Bet MGM. We have a prop shop over at FTN. I think it's free to use, by the way. So if anyone's ever interested, just FTN Fantasy, Google prop shop. And you can see like every book that's available in your state. You can see all the props.
So I think it's different this week a little bit only because he's 87. I guess my point is like, I think Puka's going to smash this week as does everybody else. The ownership's still there. I would consider him if he's over 30% mega in this stuff. So I agree. And I'm not trying to move off of him if I don't have to. But I'm saying if I don't get to him, I am going to be thinking about hoping to leverage it. Whether or not that is just hopium or not, I'll find out. But the week he was like 7K or whatever, it was like 7,300. I know you had this in your articles and stuff. We talked about it on the show. I kept talking about it. He was in my core over on the side. It's like you find a way to get different elsewhere. The epitome of it's not who you play, it's how you play them. You're playing him and you figure it out elsewhere. But overall, yes, that's definitely, the book is getting nervous on the over, man. They can't figure out the number. They're changing it up a little bit. But all right, I want to talk some game stacks. Before I do, I got to do just a couple quick things. I'm going to run through this fast just from the marketing side. I know you've got a ton of stuff going on at FTM, but I also want to make sure this is covered. So you guys see the code on the screen, SHIP19. That is 5 days for $19. I deal with the customer service and the support. So I have a bunch of people asking me, if you go to the $139 plan or the $321 plan and put in the code SHIP19, you will get 5 days for $19, but it renews. It's a trial, people. Like, remember this. So if you're not planning on sticking around longer, that's fine, but it will renew on you. So make sure that you know that. And then just quickly talk about Mastermind. Had a bunch of people ask in the chat about this today. Alex, you've helped out a ton over here. We've got another upcoming show that we want to do as well, where you're going to break down sort of your history and past and do a behind the mind episode. But this is for more process-oriented stuff. So if you like what we're talking about on this show, it's easy. It's a one-time payment. You get in. You can even split the payment up over 3 payments. But the biggest thing is, and people asked about this from today, is if you go to this and you go to the event, this one here was asked about in our Discord, so I'm just bringing it up now. The $2 million mission. By the way, DraftKings brought this tournament back this year. I'm sure you saw it, Alex. We love ticket hunting, and we'll spend a whole show maybe talking about that at some point where we go through the satellites and ways to get those tickets. That's what you do to get into a ton of these big megas and stuff. I had 5 tickets to the 33-33 Ultimate main event last year, which has $2 million for first. I just missed cashing all 5 of them. That's the spoiler alert. But if you want to know how I use the stone and how I use an optimizer and how I put together all the pieces of the content, this is the episode that you would want. You can get in for less than $100 and get on the payment plan, and it's $297 one-time payment. But I just thought I would show that off. What do you guys got going on while we're doing the marketing segment here, Alex, over for yourself and at FTN?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing over at FTN is if you're interested in contest sims, we've got those. We have different packages, by the way, so you don't have to spend a massive amount of money, especially if you are a single entry player, like many of you guys obviously are with the emphasis that we're putting on single entry in this show. So you can get sims at a very, very affordable rate over there at FTN Fantasy. And then in my own Discord, anybody who has found a lot of value from Tambo's Mastermind, you're going to love everything that I've got in my Discord as well. And then props and pick'em is the other big thing for me, and something I know that you guys don't offer to the same extent. So if you want to smash the props, like I almost think of props and pick'em as my version of cash games. I haven't played DFS cash games in like 10 years. So, I balance the risk and the long-term nature of, I know I'm going to lose a lot and I'm going to lose a lot more often than I win in DFS, but it's going to be made up for with the big wins. I balance that with more frequent wins over in props and in pick'em. And so if you're interested in doing that sort of thing, you'll also love my Discord. You can find any of that through my Twitter at Alex Blickle.
Yeah, pair it all together, get that under your umbrella for the content diet of what you're taking in. This is all focused around getting better at the game. If you're watching this show, that's clearly what you care about. And that's the key. Nobody can promise you to make you win, but they can put you in a much better position. So ShipItNation.com, get in on that, SHIP19. Go to see Alex's stuff. If you want more on the mastermind side of things, you can let me know. Hit me up in a DM or just go to ShipItNation.com/mastermind. All right, let's get to the final stuff. We got the game stacks to talk about, and then we've got our leverage lane at the end, our light at the end of the lane, where you and I are going to pick where we're going this week. I'll note a couple. I said these aren't even part of mine really quickly, just to bring it up, going back to thinking it from a stack perspective. I actually think one is Geno Smith. And it's totally different than what most will be going to. It's way down the board. I know it's a bit riskier, but one thing I'll say about it, and when people go look at this themselves, they can check it out. With no Brock Bowers and the opportunity to tighten that tree up a little bit, you don't have to run it back if you don't want to. There is Pollard and Ridley, and like you said, that's hard to figure out. Maybe you don't want them. But a spot like that is condensed and keeps my running back positions open for the ability to spend up. So it kind of ties together with all of my thinking, Alex, of like ways that you can still spend up at running back while still getting a correlated stack, while still getting a spot that's not crazy. It's definitely an opportunity. There's another way you can go in that game too, which I'll get to, but I think that's interesting as well. What are you thinking for some of your game stacks or stuff that you think to play with the stuff we already know based on ownership and whatnot?
Well, first, this Raiders call is an interesting one. I don't think I'm going to get there because I always have a bring back, and I don't want to play a Titan, just like point blank period. I don't want to play any Titans, but I could definitely see Geno having success here. And there's another interesting thing, which is Jack Besh has pretty much taken the job from Deontay Thornton, which is great for Trey Tucker because now it's not like most of the deep targets are going to go to Tucker. Almost all of the deep targets are going to go to Tucker. So I think some of that is Besh won the job from Thornton, but I think it's also Trey Tucker just so clearly was the better explosive play guy that even at $4,800, I think he's worthwhile. If I was going Geno Smith, I would definitely have Trey Tucker and then either Myers or Meyer along with him, but Trey Tucker's the one that I would definitely have. This is a tough week for stacks. Like this is, I think, the least sure I've been about what stack I'm going to play. I just wrote up 3 different stacks in an article for FTN this morning. And it's the first time this year that I think I wouldn't be surprised if the stack I end up using tomorrow is not one of those 3 within that article. I think the 2 that I will focus the most on for this show and the 2 that I'm most likely to use are number 1 is just a Herbert onslaught. This is a fantastic spot for Justin Herbert. It's especially a fantastic spot for Keenan Allen. Miami is dead last in passing success rate allowed, but they don't give up a ton of explosives. They're most vulnerable over the middle. They play a lot of too high. All of those things are great for Keenan Allen. Not quite so great for Ladd and Quentin Johnston, but Miami's still so bad, and the Chargers could be throwing so much if they can't get a ground game going without Hampton or Najee Harris. I think we could see like 45 pass attempts from Herbert, and all 3 of those receivers get there. So I would definitely have Keenan Allen. And then I have at least one of Ladd and QJ. But honestly, I'd be okay with the triple and just using all 3 and saying, I'm going to get it all of the passing production from the Chargers. I would want to bring back from Miami. I think Achane, Waller, and Waddle all make sense, but probably would have to go Waller just to save some salary. I think Achane would be my second favorite if you could fit it. The one that's a little bit more exciting and is kind of more in line with last week is go to Green Bay, use Jordan Love with either Romeo Doubs or Matthew Golden and Tucker Kraft. Kraft is the one that I 100% use. And then use Jamar Chase as a bring back again. Second straight week, Chase is number 1 in our wide receiver GPP scores. Came through in a huge way last week. Could do it again this week. And you'd also therefore be leveraging Josh Jacobs' chalk. So, there's a lot of really good chalk running backs. How do you help make the decision of who to play at running back? Well, make some decisions that easily leverage some of them, and that makes the other running back chalk even better. So that's a path that I'm really looking at as well. So that would, for me, it would probably be Love, Dobbs, Kraft, Jamar Chase.
Yeah, that's the other one I was going to bring up. That's not my lane later, but just to note it, I was going to say the Love factor. We talked a little bit about it yesterday with Mayo, Squirrel Patrol, and myself. Is like the hard part in something like single entry is guessing. And like once you can get away with like a mistake typically, but really, especially on DraftKings, it's super hard to get away with anything. And so if once you start to go down the road of Dobbs, Wicks, whatever else you're mixing in there, it's like that Golden, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, okay, well, maybe I can just go Love, Kraft, and then put Chase in there as a way to get different. Now, in larger field stuff, I want to overstack that Love spot. I do want to get enough of him in my portfolio to be able to game stack that stuff. Because remember, the Warren Buffett, be greedy when others are fearful. And that's an example of where what people are fearful of is that they make a mistake. It's like we make a mistake a ton of weeks. I've been making mistakes for 5 weeks. I haven't had any massive wins yet. It typically is, week 6 and beyond. We've got DVP rankings now that I like using some of, things like that you can do a little bit more with and just catch on to things. But my success in NFLDFS has typically always been in the sort of mid-range and second half of the season. So I think we're getting there, and this is kind of the lead up towards it. So I like that in tournaments, and I'm happy to get after it that way. So those were some that stood out. The chat was talking about Flacco, the Flacco side of it. I like Love more. I obviously talk about this a ton, where if a guy like Jamar Chase gets there, it typically brings somebody along like Burrow, but now it's Flacco. Last week it was Browning. I mean, they're changing it up so often. How do you think about that in this spot? Because I think it's fine if you go the Love side and just bring it back with Chase and get your points that way.
Yeah, I'm going to say two things here. The first is in regards to the Green Bay wide receivers, I actually do think there's a clear option. It's Romeo Doubs. I was really surprised to see this, but Romeo Doubs actually has a higher average depth of target than Matthew Golden. So like in my mind, Doubs was this, safer underneath guy, kind of like a Keenan Allen. And then Golden was the field stretcher. Doubs is actually getting those downfield targets as well. And he's got 4 touchdowns. So I really like him. The defensive splits are also pretty good for him. Like this is a pretty good matchup coverage wise with Cincinnati for him. Not as good as Tucker Kraft though, but in terms of Flacco, the way that I would do this, and I actually think it's a fine idea. It's actually a good enough idea that I've already made the decision. Like, oh, I need to think about this more. You could play Flacco with just Jamar Chase, but have the same amount of correlation by using 2 Green Bay bringbacks, which is also like the only script in which Flacco's throwing the ball enough and is aggressive enough downfield where he hits. Because otherwise, he's going to try to cut down on the interceptions that he's thrown. Interestingly there, by the way, he has 6 interceptions this year, only 4 turnover-worthy throws, which is extremely rare. It basically means like at least 2 of his interceptions were entirely not his fault. So I do like that from him. But yeah, I think the way that I would do that is Flacco, Jamar Chase, Josh Jacobs, and Tucker Kraft, and you hope that you get maybe 2 touchdowns from Jacobs, 100 yards, but then Kraft also has 100 yards and a touchdown himself. Green Bay's offense is pushing Flacco to throw the ball a lot, and maybe you get the late game, deep explosive play from Chase the way we got it last week. So I think that's a really interesting way to play this game, and it's one that I'm going to give a lot of thought to.
I also think it's interesting just to stop it, like we said earlier, in single entry again. When people, I love Kraft, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, but if you just wanted to cut it off, you could do Flacco, Chase, Kraft. Or you could use that as a way to play Jacobs and not worry as much about because you've got the others. But then you can – that's where people get so confused. And they're like, well, then I'm just playing all the chalk running backs and everything else just sort of fits together. It's like you're playing Joe Flacco and Jamar Chase. Like nobody is playing those guys. And if they go off, they're correlated together. And if they break the slate, it's everything. So people just have to remember, if it doesn't work out, again, pick your lane that you feel most comfortable with and run with it. But there's no argument that if Jamar Chase has a 35-plus point game – it's likely to benefit Flacco, who's so cheap. And instead of trying to figure out the rest and get crazy with it, you could just pick one of Kraft or Jacobs, and you're allowed to play around with variations. I don't care if you're a hand builder sitting on the toilet like we talk about, the shitter lineups, or if you're playing with an optimizer, you're allowed to compare both. Lock in Flacco, lock in Jamar Chase, lock in Kraft, and then see what happens and look for the best lineups that just use Kraft and not another Packer. And then do the same for the Jacobs stuff and look for ones that don't use them and then save those lineups and then start to compare them side by side. Like we're keeping this conversation around single entry with the ability to then extrapolate out. Mm-hmm. If you play 3 max or 20 max or 5 max, whatever number of lineups you play, well, now you might love one of the Kraft versions, you'll love one of the Jacobs versions, and you like what Alex said about playing them both. Boom, there's 3 lineups. Run with it. If that's your lane, and it's correct this week, you're going to be in great shape because you can kind of fit whatever else you want around it. Doesn't mean you'll get it all right, but you should feel good about where you're at that way. Go ahead.
Yeah, another thing I'd say is, remember, we have 6 very chalky running backs in the slate. We could see 6 guys at 25% or more. Even if you use 3 chalky running backs, you're fading at least 3 chalky running backs. So, if you're only – separators in your lineup are Flacco and Chase, it's not necessarily a horrible thing because the chance that you also have like the exact same combinations of the rest of the guys is really low. So it's not something we have to pay as much attention to this week since there are 6 really chalky running backs, and we're probably not seeing any of them get to like 60% as we do in some weeks where, if you use a 60% running back and 2 40% running backs, that's a lot different than using 3 guys at 25 to 30% and fading another 3 guys at 25%.
And what are you doing with the rest of your build? Exactly. Even if you're on those 3 running backs, it might be with I don't know if the Bucks might get steamed, but I'm saying maybe if you are on White, it's the Bucks D that goes with them to slice in. Or if you're on Williams, because now you can't get to Puka since you went to Chase, maybe you play Williams, but you play the Rams D with it. Like that's where people think it's like a crystal ball. It's like, no, it just makes sense. What I forget sometimes is that, obviously the experience level of playing longer and seeing this stuff a million times, it's like that seems more second nature. I always want to make sure it's well explained to be able to go through. Obviously, if people have questions, can throw them in there. I love my guy Richard, but I don't see it. Like he's saying the wide receiver is hitting, something to monitor. Flacco in the same boat. There's no chalk on Flacco. There's no chalk on Jamar Chase. So you're already like two guys under 5% owned, probably. I mean, if Jamar Chase gets steamed up what does he get to? 8 to 10%? Like I just don't see it happening. Not at all the way this slate sets up. And that's the other thing is, let's say you have like a Jamar Chase. I'll just use a mini one. People could throw this in. It's definitely not my lane, but just a quick one on that conversation. Flacco, Chase, Kraft. A lot of people that are playing a Packer will play Kraft, but also people will have Jacobs. When you're picking between those 6 running backs, a lot of people that go Jacobs think about the Packers. In that lineup, I may or may not be able to afford Puka because I'm spending on Chase, and that's like, oh, how could you do that? But I'm saying now that is where I go to Williams. But then I also realize that because I'm not on Jacobs and I'm not on the Packers D, I also have a pivot off the Packers D that correlates with my leverage off. And it's not really leverage, by the way, because Williams is going to get steamed up huge this week to Puka. But you get what I'm saying. When you're Flacco, Chase, Kraft, people are like, well, what the hell does Williams and the Rams D have to do with that? I just explained it. It definitely has everything to do with that, because it's, if you're on Kraft, you're not on Jacobs. If people are on Jacobs, the combos are more likely popular with the Packers. You're playing Williams, but everyone else is too, but they don't have Flacco and Chase, and now you're playing them with the Rams D. See how all that goes together? And yes, you still have more spots to fill out, but that's what I'm saying, especially when it comes down to single entry. There's levels to it that you have to think through. You don't just throw your top 9 favorite players in it. That's how the things work, where you start putting the puzzle together. So anything else on the game stacks that you want to add before we get to our leverage lane and the light at the end of the lane here?
Yeah, actually, one other thing I'll add is I think the status of Christian Gonzalez for New England is an important one. I would have some interest in Drake May stacks if Christian Gonzalez is out, because I think then there's a real chance that New Orleans actually pushes them. If New Orleans can't push them, I don't want anything to do with May or Diggs. Diggs, by the way, like he's still not playing that many snaps. He's mostly only playing on clear pass downs. And so if they're in a game script where they're way ahead and they want to run the ball and they want to play a lot of heavy personnel, and when they throw it, it's just with play action and trying to get a first down and drain clock. Like Diggs, it's not just that he won't be targeted down the field. He might not even be on the field in that type of game script. So you have to be very careful with that. But May, Hunter Henry, Stephon Diggs would be interesting if you can feel confident about like a Rashid Shaheed bring back, something like that. So that's, if Christian Gonzalez is out, that's when I'm going to be considering. If Gonzalez is in, I'm not going to give any consideration to that game whatsoever.
I love that call too. It's another, that's like more of an I know ball side of things that people don't spend enough time on. Of like, again, it's not really though, because it's more of I know DFS. And it's like, I think for this to work in real life with I know ball, it needs to have this for me to consider it in DFS. And it's like that type of thing put together as opposed to like, this guy is due for these TDs and stuff like that, where it's like, who knows? Like everyone's due for, I'm due to win the Millie Maker. When's that happening? Hopefully this weekend. I don't know. But like, it's part of those things where it could be something else. Just trying to think here too. So I don't mind going, like we usually try and wrap the show up in an hour, but it's good conversation. People are liking it. Make sure you guys do us a favor, hit the like button, hit the thumbs up. It helps us grow this show. And on top of that, if you can subscribe to the channel, we truly appreciate it as we can continue to grow that. Also, just over 11,000 subscribers now. Is there a spot we missed? I know Rams are about to be a conversation in a minute anyway, but is there anything else we missed before we get to the light at the end of the lane?
I don't think so. We haven't talked a ton about tight end. We mentioned Kraft, we mentioned Ferguson a little bit. I don't think Warren is going to be popular enough for this to really come into play, but if Warren steams and he ends up, right now we've got him at 15% in single entry. If he suddenly looks like 20, 25%, Jonathan Taylor is already one of the best GPP scores for us. With all of the running back chalk and with him being so expensive, like it's going to be really difficult for people to get to Jonathan Taylor. If he also becomes a really good leverage play off of Tyler Warren, Like that would be really interesting to me. So then you go play Jonathan Taylor. Now you're hoping that Warren fails, which makes Jake Ferguson a better play, makes Tucker Kraft a better play, makes Hunter Henry a better play. So I think even before we get to the leverage lane, like one of the themes that we've hit on a lot this show, you just hit on it, I just hit on it, is make sure that the decisions that you're making within a lineup are connected to each other this week. It's always important, but it's especially important this week. Tell that story of this guy fails, which makes this guy a better play. If he's a better play, then this guy's a better play. And just let those decisions connect with one another. And the great thing about that is, like, it also makes our job a lot easier, right? It's so hard to pick the right lineup. There are almost infinitely many combinations of lineups that we could build. If we are narrowing that down by connecting the decisions, our job becomes a lot easier and the lineup becomes better.
Yeah, 100% agree. I just want to look up one more thing on that too, because I love the Jonathan Taylor call again. And yeah, just don't believe the ownership ends up coming in as high on him as what we would think. There's already those 4 running backs that we talked about a ton this show, and then on top of it, everything else that goes with it. I know you were just talking tight end, but just going back to what you'd mentioned there, I think there's also a possibility with that for Warren. I guess, yeah, it was my lane in week whenever we started, like week 3. But if you did end up on another one that's not mine, I'm going to go to mine in a second. But if you did end up on Daniel Jones again or something in your large field stuff, or if you're playing enough lineups, or if that's the lane you want to go down, I actually wouldn't hate even like a Jones, Taylor, Warren, Pittman, if you want to mix them in. However you want to mix it up across that, they're scheduled to put up points. It is against the Cardinals. I think it's a good spot. I think the Colts D is fine. I think like a Colts onslaught is definitely a good spot on this slate. We don't name everything. It's just that's another one in all those conversations we just had that come up where I don't see Warren being as popular as he was last week. And I think Taylor has to get squeezed a little bit here by the end of the week. We'll see how that goes. He even got squeezed last week when he wasn't supposed to get fully squeezed. He still dropped from like 28% projected down to 20 to 23. So the chat's messing it all up now. So it's fine. Anyway, they can't make this stuff up. The light at the end of the lane, I'm kicking mine off first because the chat's trying to get there first. Kenny too sharp, but he probably just copied it because I was hinting at stuff in the Discord. I'm definitely going to be in on Trevor Lawrence this week. I don't think the birthday narrative, again, we don't focus on narrative street here. We had that last week. He took over. I actually thought he didn't play. People will take this the wrong way. I don't think he had a great game, and they still did enough to knock off the Chiefs. And obviously he did by the end of it, but I'm saying I think he could do a lot more. I like that the tree is more condensed now with no Brenton Strange. I like being able to keep my running back positions open. So for mine, I'm not going to do fully what you think. I'm going to talk about it, but I'm going to have a caveat here. Is my lane is going to be, I still like JSN. I still think he is too cheap, and he may get more steam by the end of the week too, because I think people are going to start to see that. He's 1,100 less than Puka. I still like Puka more on paper, but if you need the $1,100, I think JSN's great. I'm less likely to chase the Darnold stuff, and that's why I'm landing here on my lane. I'm more likely I'm going to go Lawrence, Hunter Long, and JSN. Go back to what you said. Now, the caveat is, I think everyone auto assumes with Brian Thomas Jr. The reason I don't want to fully put him in there. So first off, what I'll say, the good. I think if we saw last week, like what Igbuka can do, everyone will say, well, that's a different story. It's a new season, whatever. If you started the season, I know how big of a prospect Igbuka was. We know why he was chalk week 1. I get it. But were you really still taking him over Brian Thomas Jr. after the year he's coming off of and the type of player that he's been? So how can he not do it? He can do it. So that's the point there, first of all. But there is some stuff around Travis Hunter too now, and we started to see it last week. And so I'm leaving the middle spot open on the caveat there. Maybe I'll commit to it fully by Sunday, but I can promise you, being that this is my lane, it won't just be in single entry. You'll see it in other places where I am playing this Trevor Lawrence passing stack, and I'm using JSN on the run back. What do you think, and what do you got?
Yeah, I like it. I'd also say Jacksonville is a very good defense, but they have been the 3rd most favorable matchup for wide receiver ones, according to our DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data. This is a really good spot for JSN. It's also something that just like the way they play coverages really fits JSN's game. So I like that call quite a bit, and being able to correlate the JSN call in a nice way obviously makes a lot of sense. You ready for mine?
I'm ready, man. Whatever you got. I like that call though, but that was my thing that we didn't spend enough. I mean, again, we can't talk about everything on this show, but was The Puka stuff makes perfect sense, which segue in a second, spoiler alert, but the JSN stuff is clearly standing out to people. Like they're there, but are they all the way there in making it so that it actually makes sense? And he gets pushed and he pushes something in that. And we just saw it work last week, and I don't see as many people headed towards it this week. The pass D is not good for anybody who is a SHIPIT Nation member or an FTM member looking at those stats and seeing it. So I think the Jags can do enough here. And there's tons of ways you can get different, but allows me to still get some different leverage into my lineups in other ways as well to get different. So go ahead. I'll let you run with yours.
Yeah, mine's Davante Adams. And it's pretty straightforward, honestly. Like, obviously, if Adams has a really good game, he's leveraging both Kyren Williams and Puka Nacua. But I will give you guys some context into why I think Adams can have that type of ceiling game that steals from those guys. His average FF target this year is 12.5. That's over 4 yards above what it was last year in New York. And it's the highest average FF target he's ever had in his entire career. They are using him in an incredibly valuable role. And the second part to that is, we haven't seen the huge reception game, and therefore we haven't seen the huge yardage game. His catch rate is under 50% so far. And even running these downfield routes, it's Matt Stafford and Davante Adams. That catch rate is going to positively regress. And when it does, we're going to see games where Adams, instead of being stuck at like 5 for 88, it's 7 for 140. And it's 7 for 140 with 2 scores. So the massive games, I think, are really coming for Adams. This is a great matchup. We consider Adams the wide receiver 1 in our data just because we don't base it off of like who does the offense want to get the ball to. It's how does the defense defend this team? And when you look at how Philly defended them, Quinyon Mitchell was shadowing Davante Adams. Davante Adams consistently gets the wide receiver 1 treatment because it's impossible to do that to Puka with the way he moves around pre-snap, the way he lines up in all types of formations, including out of the backfield sometimes, or like an inline tight end blocking, and then he's the play action guy. So Baltimore has been a top 5 matchup for the second consecutive year for opposing wide receiver 1s, which again, they're going to treat Adams in that way. This is a smash spot for him. I think he's being severely undervalued for what his role is. And crucially, when we get that ceiling performance, if we can leverage 2 30+% guys in Puka or Kyren, that's going to make a world of difference for us. So I think Davante Adams is far and away the best play on the slate, and he's where I'm going to start my lineup.
Man, strong takes. I know one thing people are talking in the chat about strong wins being a possibility in that game, and that's where I think, too, like you talked about earlier, where Williams is the Ram that's going to get just steamed the most based off of that. I think if you're going that route, the way to do it differently is with the Rams D. But like you said, if it is a game for Adams, it could be a big one. And the other thing is he's in that no man's land for wide receiver pricing at 6,700. It's people are either going to go up, down, or around. They're not really looking for that. And when they're going to a Ram, they're looking for Williams or Puka. So could be a really standout call. Anything else that we forgot or that you want to mention before we get out of here?
Well, I think the only other thing along with that is if you are so actually I will address the weather real quick. I don't really care. So the first thing here is like, I think it's quarterback dependent. Stafford has one of the strongest arms and some of the most confidence in his arm in the league. And he deserves to have it, right? Like he's Matt Stafford, the guy who was born to throw a football and throw it well. And also, it's not like Adams is running these deep routes as, a difficult 40-yard throw down the sideline. It's like deep crossers and things like that, where he's catching it 22 yards downfield and then running with it. So I think the types of throws that he's getting downfield aren't affected by the wind anyway. And because it's Matt Stafford, I care even less. So I still really like Adams. But I also think that we can connect this Adams decision with a running back decision. If Adams is making Kyren Williams less intriguing, now Javonte Williams or Ashton Genty in that range, they become even better. They become more likely to be the guy that you need or the best value in that range, because one of the great options in that range, Kyren Williams, is less likely to succeed. So kind of continuing the theme of making sure that our decisions this week are really connected, I think that's one of them. If you're using Davante, that like mid 6K range of running backs becomes even better since we know we're not using Kyren.
Yeah, I love the interconnectivity. Like, again, we just talk about that a ton on this show. And that's something I think that, just in talking to a ton of people at SHIPIT Nation, in the Mastermind Project, all the stuff that you do, I'm sure is the same, where it's like, it doesn't resonate as quickly with people about how it's all interconnected, as opposed to like, if they don't always think of the if this, then that. And that's what we're trying to help you guys with here. If you guys appreciate this and it's helping you out, make sure to hit that thumbs up. I will say, people know about a TED Talk. I'll do my Tambo talk on the way out. It's a bit of a rant, but you don't know how many people have come through and said this show is their new favorite show. And, I love that this combination's together. Maybe we get it for the PGA season, things like that. Definitely a possibility, but I can't stress this enough. Nobody wears their heart on their sleeve more, is more vulnerable and open just to saying the truth. The more you like it, the more you hit the like button and help the show grow, the more we're able to show. I don't think that resonates either with people. They think of like begging for likes or whatever it might be. I can't stress it enough. This show can easily just go behind the paywall, and it's great for SHIPIT Nation members. We can duel it up and get it over to the FTN side, and everybody that pays can get it. If you want free stuff and you like the free stuff, you have to hit the free stuff. The free button is the like button. So do that for us. It helps us out. We get more subscribers. We get more information out there. We get more people to see us and find us. And that allows us to do these things for free. You have to get that through to make sure you understand that as well. So hopefully that rant helps. Alex, let the people know where they can find you, man, before we get out of here.
At Alex Blickle 1 on Twitter, and both FTN and my Discord you can find through there. Use promo code Blick for 10% off at FTN, and use promo code Leverage for 10% off at my Discord.
Yeah, appreciate it. And a lot of people, we had a lot of people that would like this to be behind the paywall. Like, man, just don't give this out to everybody. But it's like, again, not tooting our own horn as much as we really love this. It's our passion. We want to do it, but it is part of it. Like, we can't stress it enough. People don't understand all this side of the business and what works. Like, there's AI algorithm slop everywhere that's getting pushed out there, and you love what you're watching. You're literally spending over an hour with us and you can't help it out. It's like, you got to do that. It just takes 2 seconds of your day. So thank you guys for watching. We appreciate it. Go to SHIPITNation.com. Use code SHIP19 to get the stack rankings, get the stone, get in on all the action there. That's going to be your best way. 5 days for $19. We'll be back next week to go through, review, break it all down again for week 7. For Alex, for myself, ToeTagginTambo, let's ship it.